I recently got to talk to Dr. Stephen Hayes, a towering figure in the field of psychology, especially in relation frame theory, contextual behavioral science, acceptance and commitment therapy. He's a charismatic scientist and clinician, and I realized his gift to describe difficult concepts in a simple manner. This I think is not easy, especially when you talk about therapy and psychology. We jumped around a bit as we were going along with the conversation. He mainly touched on how ACT can go beyond the clinical setting and be followed as a way of living. We also talked about the philosophical underpinnings of acceptance and commitment therapy and contextual behavioral science. And I felt, in a nutshell, that this conversation was about what is it like to be a human. And I left it with a sense of warmth and a sense of reflective space inside from which you feel bigger than what your mind is telling you are, and you feel freer. It's difficult to put it into words. He was so warm, approachable. He put me at ease. He talked about his own values-based journey, and I truly appreciate his self-disclosure. I felt anxious at the beginning. It took me a while to warm up. At the end of the day, I've been reading him through his books. I've been listening to his podcasts and watching his videos, and suddenly I just saw him there in person. It was a profound moment for me. I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. So off we go. Hi, my name is Christos Papalekas, and I feel grateful, honored, and enthusiastic to host this personally long anticipated dialogue on acceptance and commitment therapy as a philosophical journey with Professor Stephen Hayes. So Stephen, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with me today. It really means a lot.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So for those of us in the know, Dr. Stephen Hayes really needs no introduction, but for those who are not, Professor Stephen Hayes is the lead of the behavioral analysis program at the Department of Psychology at the University of Nevada. He's the author of 44 books and nearly 600 scientific articles. He is the developer of relation frame theory, which is an account of higher cognition, and a co-founder of acceptance and commitment therapy known as ACT. He has been acknowledged by the scientific community as one of the highest impact psychologists in the world, and he's one of the most cited scholars in all areas of study. Over the years, Stephen, I've been following your work, and I want to share that you have enriched massively my knowledge, which has consequently benefited me personally and professionally. So big thank you for that. Why we're here today, I want to explore with you how ACT can go beyond the clinical session as an eclectic way of living, perhaps informed by philosophy. The destination is unknown. I don't know exactly where we're gonna go with it, but I know it's purposeful and meaningful, and that's what matters really. I cannot resist to start to ask you a question which is close to my heart. In some of your trainings, I've noticed you have brought up basketball as a metaphor to convey your message. to convey your teachings. And I love basketball too. I grew up watching Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Isaiah Thomas, all these giants of NBA. And I love ACT too. So if you don't mind, I want to ask you, what do you feel ACT and basketball have in common? Or perhaps if you can bring up a metaphor to bring them both together.
You can use that as a metaphor. It's also literally true because there are NBA teams that have mental performance coaches who are ACT people. The 76ers, Patty Steinfort there, who's recently left the team, though, was an ACT mental performance coach, was written up recently in Sports Illustrated. And throughout coaching Major League Baseball and so forth, the Olympics are coming up. There's many different ACT coaches out there. And why? Because the processes that we're dealing with are not just about mental health, they're about behavioral health, but not just that. They're about high performance, social well-being, and so on.
Right.
But as a metaphor, you know, you can look at it in different ways. But for the person actually trying to put ACT into the lives of others, you know, I like the metaphor of the kind of immediate feedback that you get in sports of, you know, the ball through the hoop, you know, and the purpose of the game. The purpose of this dance. The purpose of these folks moving around the court that way is the ball through the hoop, or not, depending on which side of you are at that moment. And practitioners, coaches, people who are trying to make a difference need to know what the ball through the hoop is. And sometimes I think their minds get pulled into, well, it's just outcome. No, that's more like the score at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And if your feedback was only the score at the end of the game, period, end of story, you know, you may miss what's really important about how that happens. There's sad tales sometimes. Who was the soccer team in the Middle East where some dictator, you know, threatened the whole team to kill them all if they didn't win the game. You know, that's not a game anymore.
Yeah, indeed.
You know, but for people trying to make a difference in people's lives, the ball through the hoop is the changing the processes by which they live their lives, by which they interact with those moments. You know, what is the exact move they're making? And there you shift into another metaphor, just like, what if you are like a member of a team? What does it mean to really sort of view yourself as gathering together a team? And you've got parts of you that kind of are like wild players that don't look like they belong. Yeah. For example, you may have anxiety show up before an event like this. Yeah.
Yes.
As if it doesn't welcome. Oh, it's just going to get in the way. Well, I don't know. I mean, that may be like a player who's good at some things, you know, like the big muscular guy down under who's really good at muscling out people away from the basket, but, you know, is not very good at shooting, but is a really important player sometimes to having the whole team work.
Yeah.
Something like anxiety can sometimes give you an indication about what's important, about what in your history that is showing up here, what that might suggest, you know, how to negotiate those moments. Like, just think about all the different emotions that you have, and then the tendency of the mind to sort them until they belong on the court or they don't, staying with that metaphor. And yet, are there any that don't have an important role in your life? Are there any emotions that you can name that aren't useful to you? That you don't even pay money to produce under some circumstances?
Absolutely.
And every single one is important sometimes.
Absolutely.
Their moves matter sometimes. So they're part of the team.
Yes.
So how do you think of your own life in such a way that everything, all your experiences and so forth are welcome? And it's more a matter of how do I then kind of coordinate that in a cooperative way that I get to get the ball through the hoop. So I think sports is kind of a metaphor for life, isn't it? And at multiple levels. One reason I like working with coaches, and you know, I do have a number that I'm in regular communication with, and because it really tests your ability to put psychological knowledge on the ground. And it's very, very concrete. I mean, you win or you don't, you did it or you didn't, you stepped up or you didn't. And
Correct.
That's not really not that different than life itself. It's just that usually we're not looking at a scoreboard with big numbers.
Indeed. And I guess we learn when we fail, don't we? I mean, these players, they've got so much pressure on their shoulders to perform. And sometimes they don't get the ball through the hoop, and then the inner chatter goes.
Well, and think of all those. How many shots do you think an average NBA player has taken? And what is the arc of a performance that led to that? You know, Stephen Curry ability of shooting threes from, you know, incredible range and so on. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of missed shots.
Yes.
Not just made shots, missed shots. Yeah. And they're all important.
Yes.
They're equally important, you probably would say, in terms
Absolutely.
of feedback and learning through the hoop, not through the hoop. Equally important is if your eyes are kept wide and you allow it to penetrate you and allow your body to learn what your body can do. And, you know, you got a mind and it's saying some things, but don't let it interfere. It doesn't really know how to shoot a basketball. If you start overthinking, oh, the backspin on the ball, and might say, you know, you're done.
Yes.
You're done. Your body wisdom knows a lot more. And that's another kind of metaphor there, that you want verbal knowledge. You want something like good coaching rules, but you also want to be able to move it to the side. And in many, many areas like love, compassion, values, etc., if we don't know how to move the problem-solving mind to the side, we can't allow our experience to allow it to teach us how to make those shots that are important.
True.
In our relationships or with our kids or with a business or work that we do, or just our own sense of well-being, relaxation, fun, participation. So
True. If I can ask you a personal question, Stephen, what is it about ACT that you feel so much inspired about?
Well, I've been living it for how many years? I mean, I wake up in the morning thinking about and doing things that are relevant to ACT, and I go to bed at night with it still in my mind and kind of in my heart, because what these processes are about how to live a life that's, you know, whole, free, connected, values-based. And that's in the minds of us all, really, you know, like, what am I doing here? What do we really want to focus on? Maybe not in an analytic way. You wouldn't want it in an analytic way. But that's another example how you rein in your analytic mind when what you need is something more like an appreciative motive mind, or even one that's so intuitive that there's no sense that you're in your mind at all. And I had the good fortune of really needing to do that, because I developed a panic disorder that brought me almost to my knees. I've told that story many times. But I think the thing that is most inspiring about the ACT work is that we've been able to build a community around these processes that is an open and accepting community that is focused on long-term good for others and what's of importance. And so I find I can kind of nest what I'm doing in a larger group of, it kind of reflects, just like the metaphor of basketball.
Yes.
We're kind of nesting at multiple levels, kind of playing with how this thing that we know and love in one area can reflect on others. And that's increasingly happening. And we're seeing that, for example, you know, ACT is, yes, relevant to mental health, but it's also relevant to things like how we organize ourselves to deal with climate change. In Canada, the temperatures hit 118 yesterday, highest temperature in the history of that country. 118 in British Columbia. You know, and
unheard of.
Yes, this is an issue, isn't it? There's a real issue there. And you look and you see the immigration crisis, or Black Lives Matter, or, you know, economic disparities, or the harshness that's going on in some of our political climates with authoritarian rule and things of that kind, or the failure of economic systems, and the inability we have to cooperate. All of those challenges link all the way down to processes that are in this conversation.
Yeah.
That are in you and in me. And we've done the work. It sounds prideful, but I'll say it, in the contextual behavioral science community, the community that's developing it, to dive down into some of the basic cognitive processes, but also to scale up into the social processes and how you can use scientific principles to build small group cooperation that's nested and can actually do important things socially, such as the work with Lynn Ostrom's Nobel Prize winning core design principles. We put together in a program called Pro-Social that puts ACT with this kind of social scaling. So I get up in the morning excited. I'm applying these principles myself. I'm seeing it in the newspaper. I know that we're on a journey together as a human population of how to evolve on purpose, personally and culturally. And experimental science has a role in that.
Absolutely.
And the challenges are so big, we better really think about that way, because a one world ethic is necessary and really wise application of scientific principles, but not in a top-down way. Don't turn the world over to the scientists, period, end of story. No, we're all involved.
Yeah.
And what needs to be done, what our values are. So I've given you kind of a multi-level answer. I hope it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. In one of your trainings, you shared a shocking finding. After the training, I went back to work and I shared it with my colleagues, and they said, that's unheard of. I was a bit, my jaw dropped. I felt speechless. So the finding you shared was that in our field, in psychology and therapy, experience doesn't predict competence.
Right.
It predicts confidence. So I would really appreciate if you can really illustrate on that. Why is that in our field?
Yeah, as a group, as a whole, psychotherapy is one of a very small number of areas where experience doesn't lead to performance. And the only way that you can arrange that, because on average, the 10,000 hour rule, Anders Ericsson's finding, a good guy, by the way, who, can show you that in almost any area, whether you're playing chess, tennis, you name it, anything, learning how to paint a house, anything. By the time you've got 10,000 hours doing anything, you're pretty good at it.
True.
But that's not true in every area of life. There are few exceptions, and psychotherapy is one. The only places where it doesn't apply is where you get bad feedback. Because if you think about how experience works, you do things, it produces consequences, and that shapes or dials in, just like we were talking about with a ball through the hoop. It shapes or dials in your skills to a degree. Now you can age to the point that you lose your skills because your body leaves your ability, et cetera. But the basic learning process is variation and selection. It's trying different things and allowing what works to stick and what didn't work to fall away. And, that's a 500 million-year-old process. Every creature on the planet that evolved since the Cambrian, which was 545 million years ago, knows how to learn that way.
Yeah.
Before that, no, by the way, jellyfish don't.
Yes.
Sponges don't. But spiders, snakes, you name it, do. And people. But not in every area. If I give you bad feedback, if I really set it up so that you misread the consequences of what you do, you can spend an unlimited number of hours doing it and not get better. And so what is the feedback that comes to a normal practitioner? It's praise from their clients. It's whether or not they'll come back.
Yeah.
And it's whether or not you see symptom change, whatever it is that you think that you're targeting.
Yeah.
Clients will praise you out of dependency, not just out of success. And they will stay with you because they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And you probably even know therapists who have people on their caseload forever who are not getting better. But they figured out a way to sort of set it up that it seems like that makes sense. And I don't mean in an evil way. It's not like the clinician is sitting down and saying, oh, I can, milk this person for cash forever. It's not like that.
Yeah.
You think that you're actually helping.
Yeah.
But when you look at the arc of it, and you probably know people that you wouldn't refer your family members to.
Yeah.
Because they'd be in a therapy a long time, but they wouldn't get what you'd want to send them to therapy for. So when you do the whole group and you put it together, that all averages out, and it looks like experience makes no difference whatsoever. But, and the symptom change problem is that while symptoms can matter, they were mostly made up not because people said, hey, this is really what I want to see change, but more because we had a biomedicalization of human suffering that looked for indications that might help us find a latent disease that's underneath these categories. So you take something like chronically mentally ill who may hear voices. Yeah. It's obvious hearing voices. It's crazy. They're insane. Oh my God. Then you go and collect data on how many people hear voices. Yeah. It's a shocking percentage of people. And you look in the history of humankind, the oracles of Delphi made perfect sense to the Greeks. Julian Jaynes showed this back in the day, because almost everybody experienced their thoughts as if there were voices. And and people, by the way, hearing voices can do very, very well, and never have a diagnosable disorder and never really need. And you do that with any of these so-called symptoms. Yeah. Anxiety. I just mentioned earlier, anxiety can be a huge ally for you. Okay, then intensity. No, intense anxiety too can be a huge ally. Take anyone. So they were in there so that we could have this delusional idea. Well, initially it wasn't delusional. Collecting signs and symptoms might help you find the disease. But in many areas of medicine, even after you've biomedicalized human functioning, that didn't pay off. Cancer, for example. It used to be that you'd say, oh, the red shape, and then there's the one that has the darker shape, and the one that, and all if the lesion is here, then it means that, people didn't get any better in terms of cancer. But what made the difference in cancer treatment is getting down and really figuring out what the basic biological, neurobiological processes are. How do oncogenes get turned on or off? By what? How do you actually intervene with the growth of a cell that's unusual, et cetera? And that's still continuing. Messenger RNA things we have right now with COVID are being used against cancer. I mean, we're right on the edge of some cool things where individual genomic analysis will give a cancer treatment just for you. That level of specificity. Well, that came out of the basic labs and the basic understanding. So my point being that we struggled for 40, 50 years inside a lousy diagnostic system that promised it would someday pay off. And in the history of psychology and psychiatry, there's not one single psychiatric disease that has appeared from syndromes. And the last one was general paresis, and you don't have any untreated syphilitic patients on your caseload. I guarantee you do not. Yes. So, and if you do, run to the physician and get an antibiotic prescription. Yeah. But so time's up. We need a different way forward, and ACT is vigorously pursuing that. I say ACT, not the method, but the community, in taking a process-based approach that is focused on the proximal outcomes of change that will, I hope, give clinicians immediate feedback. And what is that? Processes of change. Absolutely. The small steps people take that we know are functionally important to long-term outcomes. Yeah. And that's what the psychological flexibility model that's underneath ACT. It's the smallest set of processes that do the most things in all of behavioral science. I can say that without fear of contradiction. And I've done the work and examination of that, and I can walk you through why I say that. But there's literally thousands of studies on the psychological flexibility model, many, many, many hundreds on their functionally important impact. And on top of that mountain of evidence, you can say, here are some things you can target and change. And when you change it, you'll see it. You'll see it quickly. You'll see it right in front of you with your client. Your clients will see it. And they reliably predict long-term outcomes. They're important to long-term outcomes. So that gives you a chance to learn by experience. That gives you a chance to get out of this almost mockery of our field where experience doesn't predict competence. It only predicts confidence. It's a bad combination.
Correct.
Confident incompetence is not a good thing.
Not at all. I wouldn't refer to anyone, I love, to someone who is confident but not competent. Absolutely.
That's frightening. You don't want that. It do a lot of harm. And my country has lived through 4 years of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the field of psychology, Stephen, I think therapy is a clinical application, and ACT, which I love and is highly humanistic, and I love it because one of the reasons is it doesn't pathologize human nature. So I think therapy is a clinical application of philosophy, and in our field there has been an increased openness to borrow philosophical elements and incorporate them into systems of care. You read Aristotle, and he talks about eudaimonic well-being, and how the aim of life is to bring fulfillment, to bring vitality, to be purposefully engaged with life. And he mentioned the virtues. And when I read that, I think of values and say, wow, that's
Sure.
ACT, isn't it? And then, you read Plato, and his teaching has been described as the epitome of existentialism, and that, we are very comfortable in our ignorance. And it's only when you step out of the cave that you realize you're contextually sensitive. And I think, wow, that's diffusion, And then and then more classical philosophers, they talk about that emotions is not something that has to be eliminated and reduced, but something we can learn from, and that everything in life has an opposite force. And then I think, wow, that's a values piece of work, and we hear when we care, and we care when we hear it, and then functional contextualism. So I think ACT is a reflection of philosophy. And what I want to ask you, Stephen, is how do you feel philosophy can really inform ACT and contextual behavioral science in general?
Well, it's a good question. And the CBS, Contextual Behavioral Science wing, has spent a lot of time in philosophy of science. I was a philosophy minor in college, but in my scientific work, I've been especially focused on philosophy of science. What are the philosophical ways, what philosophical systems will most empower what it is we're trying to do psychologically? I think a philosophy of science is really nothing more than explicating and owning your own assumptions and their coherence and linked to your purposes. And that's a very, very important thing, because if you're not clear about your assumptions, as they are allowed to work in the background, because you always have assumptions. You have assumptions about what's true, what's a fact, what am I trying to do, et cetera. It's all built in to any life exploration about anything, but especially in the sciences, where we have to have selection criteria. What do we even mean by a finding or a successful outcome or a principle or a piece of knowledge? I mean, all those things require some sort of vetting about what is the game we're playing? What is the ball through the hoop? Back to basketball.
Yeah.
And, I've been, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the philosophical assumptions that are underneath some of the more progressive behavioral sciences. And here I have to, say that, I come out of the behavioral wing, behavior analytic wing, but a particular wing of that wing that outside of behavioral analysis and behavioral psychology is sometimes not known at all.
Mm.
So much so that most people usually pick behavior analysis, behavioral psychology as the whipping boy for any bad thing they can think of, and that's certainly true in philosophy.
Yeah.
But I was very moved by some radical behavioral philosophers. Willard Day, the late Willard Day, for example, the editor and founder of the journal Behaviorism, which now has a different name, but had a big impact on me. Willard is why I'm here at the University of Nevada. He was actually a faculty member here, and
All right.
a charismatic person. Yeah, I almost left my graduate training program in West Virginia and came to study with Willard. Good thing I didn't, but I was so fascinated, for reasons I could explain, but so fascinated with the man, incredibly charismatic, brilliant philosopher who wrote pieces like Radical Behaviorism and Reconciliation of Phenomenology. I mean, he had that kind of span. Yeah. What he saw in the behavioral work and what some of my teachers, a guy named John Kraffel, you wouldn't know, but some of the professors who really got me looking at the philosophy of science that's underneath Skinner's work, radical behaviorism, in a particular way. What he saw was this radical, contextual, pragmatic, functional, anti-mechanistic position that does indeed share a lot of features with phenomenology. It has the same feel of this kind of holistic, whole person. And it's odd because it's an experimental analysis of behavior. Why would that be? Well, I came to believe I was influenced in this with Hayne Reese, who was a very, very good child experimental psychologist, Marxist, and very interested in contextualistic philosophy, who put me on to the work of Stephen C. Pepper, who was chair of both philosophy and art at the same time at the University of California, Berkeley.
Right.
And was the chair of the department when T.S. Kuhn wrote Structure of Scientific Revolution. And you can see Pepper in Kuhn if you know Pepper. Kuhn never acknowledges Pepper. Never, but you can see it. You can really, and I'm going to probably won't have time to unpack that, but Kuhnian thinking has had a huge impact on philosophy of science. But back to Pepper. Pepper had this idea that philosophy, these core assumptions need to be integrated into a root metaphor because we're not that cognitively sophisticated. And so we take common sense metaphors that we find in life and we use them as kind of a model. And he said there were four major ones. Later on, he tried to come up with a fifth that I don't think worked, but which is organicism, formism, mechanism, and contextualism. And the four metaphors were like a growing plant, organicism, like repeated forms, kind of like leaves of a tree or pages in a ream of paper, repeatable forms, or parts, relations, and forces, like a simple mechanism, like a lever or a wind-up clock, or the ongoing historical act in context, like, what are you doing? I'm going to the store.
Yeah.
The common sense act in context. And I'm a common sense act in context guy. I'm a contextualist. And I thought so was Skinner. But most contextualists are the kind you see in hermeneutics, feminist psychology, narrative psychology, dramaturgy, Marxism, etc., where there's an appreciation of the whole, social constructionism.
Yeah.
There's appreciation of the whole that's important, the ongoing act in context. If you lose context, you don't have the act. It's integrated. If I say, what's going to the store, you wouldn't say it's moving legs. If you disconnect moving legs, there's no going to the store. You don't put it together like Tinker Toys. It's moving to the store, going to the store. And if there's an interruption, like the road is closed by which you normally walk to the store, you find another way because it's integrated and it's nested. I'm going to the store to buy groceries so I can make a meal because my boss is coming over then part of that act is having a meal for my boss. Part of that act is Having a career, part of that act might be social relationships, etc. So it's nested and multi-stranded. Well, that's wonderful in appreciating the grit and grain of evolving life. Not so good when you try to do something.
Yeah.
Social constructionists have a really hard time actually doing anything and then staying inside the root metaphor, because it sounds more like something came in, more like a tinker toy, more like a wind-up clock, more like mechanism, and it made it happen. Here's the brilliant thing that the Skinner did, I think. He was a deep, intuitive contextualist who never left that, but who had a purpose of prediction and influence.
Yeah.
He called it prediction and control of these whole acts in context. And all I've done in my philosophy of science work is rounded that out a little bit. I call it functional contextualism. Radical behaviorism, bad name because it sounds like an extreme form of behaviorism. And why wouldn't you believe that? It's right in the words. But in fact, Skinner blew up almost all of behaviorism. You know, Watson said, didn't look within. Skinner said, I'm interested in looking within, in the classic place where he's talking to E.G. Boring, a famous psychologist. And he says, creating a pun in the place where he first really rolled out why private events are important. I'm interested in boring from within. How many people are not behaviorists would think that Skinner is the guy who's fighting for thoughts, feelings, memories, bodily sensations being important to behavioral psychology?
Yeah.
And nobody except people deep inside their tradition would even know it.
Yeah.
And the reason is because he made such a huge mistake with verbal behavior. But I'll get to that in a quick. I'll rein in this. This is a long answer. But what I saw in Skinner was this intuitive contextualist who did what contextualists should do. If you appreciate that your act of analysis is an act in context, that your behavior as a scientist is an act in context, then just like going to the store, when I say, what are you doing? I want to know, what is the outcome? What is the purpose? What are you pursuing? What is this functional strand part of? Yeah. And the answer in traditional contextualistic approaches is appreciation of the whole.
Mm.
Why? I mean, it's fine. Whatever turns you on, dude. You know, I'm not going to tell you what your purposes are if that's your purpose. But frankly, I don't care about your appreciation.
Yeah.
Oh, but you should care about your appreciation. Well, I don't even care about my appreciation.
Yeah.
And the only thing I want to know is how to make a difference.
Yeah.
What kind of difference? A helpful difference to who? To people who need things, to humans. That's not appreciation.
Yeah.
That's doing something that reliably produces an effect. And what Skinner did basically, and he made a mistake. He said, the purpose of science is prediction and control, which is absolute nonsense. That's the purpose of his science.
Mm.
And he made people so mad when he said that. I said, I don't care about control at all. I'm only interested in understanding. It's arrogant. That violates behaviorism. It'd be like going to a rat and saying, you shouldn't be reinforced by that food. What are you talking about? That's idiotic.
Yeah.
You shouldn't do that to other people. You should say, my purpose of my science is prediction and control. But then I want to add some things. Control, A, is a bad word because sometimes it means just elimination of variability. And it has this connotation of top-down control.
Yeah.
And Skinner spent his life trying to write about how that will not work, Walden 2, etc. Prediction and influence is better. But not just that. If I hold a gun to your head and say, give me your money, and you hand me your wallet, that doesn't mean I understand charity.
Yeah.
I can force control on things and not have any deep understanding of it. Yeah. So we need prediction and influence. So I'm softening it a little bit because that's really what he was talking about.
Mm.
With precision, these concepts apply in a precise way. Scope, they apply to many things. And depth, they're coherent across levels of analysis, well-developed areas of science, such as biology or anthropology, et cetera. Things that are known there should never contradict psychology and vice versa. Something's wrong if it is, because we seek a unified fabric of science. When you clean it up that way, woohoo, now I can hang out with hermeneutists, and I have. We did a book called Varieties of Scientific Contextualism.
Yeah.
And we drilled in all these contextualists, the hermeneutists, the narrative people, all these folks, Ted Sarbin, the late Ted Sarbin, the really good descriptive contextualist, I now call it. The Kelly Roll theory people, all these different folks, Marxists.
Yeah.
Can I tell that story? We did this conference.
Yeah, of course.
We saw this vision. If we got all the contextualistic philosophers together, philosophy of science types in psychology, that maybe we could have a conversation in which they would see that, oh, by golly, you're a fellow traveler, but you just have different goals. And within contextualistic thinking, that's fine. You're going to the store and you're getting your car fixed. There's nothing incoherent about that. You can have different goals for an acting context, right? Scientists can have different goals and still be contextualists. And we hold this conference, we bring all these monsters of descriptive contextualist social constructionists, really well known. Read the book, you'll see they're very, very well known people. When they sit, all of them are on one side of the room without us organizing that. And the interbehaviorists, the radical behaviorists on the other side of the room.
Yeah.
And the ones who are there, who are out of the more descriptive types, literally have their arms folded. Not on purpose, but it's just reflecting where they are, like, why am I even here talking to these people who are the enemy? Yeah. I've been writing for years about it. They're the enemy. They're mechanists. They put people into parts, and by the end of the conference, we're all together, our arms around each other. We have this beautiful picture of these top-level people, really feeling a deep kinship.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry for such a long story, but let me say it this way. The functional contextualistic philosophy underneath ACT and contextual behavioral science turns out to be a very powerful set of assumptions for scientists. It also resonates easily with the common sense assumptions of applied people around the world and with people who want things from science. Most people don't want just appreciation. They don't want just understanding. They want principles that can make a difference in their lives. When you go to Congress and you ask for money or whatever, when you go to the World Health Organization, it's always rationalized that way. But it's always, and eventually we'll get there when we deeply understand. No, dude, if that's your goal, make that your metric of understanding. You can do that. And the contextualists have done that.
Yeah.
And so it's a powerful revision of pragmatic philosophy, which is what contextualism is. It's William James, it's Peirce, it's Dewey, it's, put now into the world with this edition, state your goals publicly. That wasn't in there. Varieties of religious experience. James said, and look, people with religious beliefs, have to do better. Wait a minute, better with regard to what?
Yeah.
Did you say that beforehand? No. You're cheating. You can't just have better mean anything that feels good. Then scratching your butt is truth. I mean, come on. The criticisms of pragmatism become real. That Hitler was a pragmatist, that kind of thing. The criticism of pragmatism that brought pragmatism down come because the pragmatists didn't own up to the fact you have to state your goals clearly, publicly, and allow people to vote with their feet. And when you do that, now we've got a really powerful philosophy because we've lined up evolutionary epistemology with our ongoing complex cognitive activity. And if you had to order things in my life, you'd say, what's the most important thing in your intellectual life? I'd say functional contextualism is the most important. Relational frame theory is the second most important. ACT is the third most important.
That was a prolific answer, Stephen, and so uniquely you brought, philosophy and therapy. It's sometimes very difficult to find a common space in the clinical room, how you can really bring philosophy and the technology of ACT together, which leads me to the next question. What will be the consequences of me as a clinician not being informed by philosophy, if any consequences?
Well, you'll make mistakes, but I don't put that as a front end. I don't say you have to study the philosophy first. No, just like relational frame theory. It's a Trojan horse. ACT is the horse, and then it pulls in this thing called relational frame theory. But then relational frame theory pulls in this thing called functional contextualism and the behavioral principles that have surrounded that in behavior analysis. And so it's an acquired taste, but ultimately, if you really want to be good at ACT, you want to know RFT, you want to know behavioral principles, you want to know evolutionary science into which it fits, and you want to know the philosophical assumptions. And let me just walk you through just a couple places where it will land.
Yeah.
If you are a functional contextualist and you appreciate that the ACT-in context is a fundamental unit, it's one whole unit, it's not parts, it only makes sense, but it's nested. It can be as large or as small as you want. Skinner has a little face where he says, grabbing the doorknob of your car and driving to the beach are both operants. You can have it as small as you want or as big as you want. And it's all nested, not nested mechanistically like Legos, but nested in your analytic purpose. I'm focusing on this only by ignoring its participation in the whole, because the ACT-in context is in a context and a context and a context and a context, and eventually it's the one world. And it's the one world so radically that you can't say anything about it, because then there's two. Yeah. If I say a single word about the one world, I've now partitioned it into what I said and what it is. And so, there's a holistic quality. This is why descriptive contextualism eventually ends up with Cratylus' of Greek philosophers' last lecture, which was this. That was it. That was his last lecture, because he realized that even to say anything partitions, and the holistic quality of the ACT-in context as it expands out eats everything into the one. And then it's very close to tipping into mysticism, which is fine, but you can't do very much with mysticism except appreciate. But anyway, back on my point. When we do values work, why do we do values work in ACT? Because without that anchor of for what, all the rest of the work doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Let me spin around the hexagon. I hope that people know what psychological flexibility is. When we work on diffusion, let's say, what we're doing is we're softening an analytic category enough that you can be more open to the contextual features that surround it in such a way that your relationship to that event, and even its nature as an event, is appreciated as itself an ACT-in context.
Yeah.
It isn't a thing. There are no things. In a contextualistic perspective, you start with the one. You break it up for pragmatic purposes. And by the way, this is evolutionarily sensible. Don't be thinking that your sensory system gets you oriented to the real world. Nonsense. If you read Donald Hoffman's book on the case against reality, evolution gives you no reason to think that we're dialed into the real world. What we're dialed into is not being eaten in and with the one world. Even the things we see. And when you run Monte Carlo simulations and so forth, if you allow in evolutionary gaming, for example, the truth to compete with the useful lies, the useful always wins out.
Yeah.
What if the world is more like the movie The Matrix and it's cascading green letters? How would you interact with that? It would be like trying to interact with your computer with seeing nothing more than the ones and zeros that represent, they're not even really ones and zeros, the positive and negative charges in the chips that are running your machine. What you see is little rectangular things that are blue, and that's the file. That's not a file. A file isn't blue. It doesn't have a rectangular shape. That's a metaphor for interacting in and with this system. Yeah. In the same way, our words about our experience, our divisions, even sensorily of our experience, are not the whole of our experience. They're useful ways of interacting. So step back a little bit and hold them to use. I want to know, don't drag the blue rectangle into the trash can. It'll be gone forever. Not because it's really rectangular and blue and because there's a trash can, but because it helps me write my novel or write my paper. And if I don't do it, bad things happen. Same way. Diffusion gives you that little sense of, how is this useful to me? Now, if you go into therapy without it, when the client says, I know it's not helpful, but it's true, you'll have nothing to say. Because sometimes it actually is true. I mean, when the obsessive compulsive person rolls out how this could lead to this, could lead to this, this could lead to this horrible outcome. And you say, yeah, actually, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not insane. That's right.
True.
That bug could have had that insect poison from that tree that got on the rug that poisoned your children. That's right. But you're going to have to say, and how useful is that? It seemed like a cheat. It's not useful, but it's true. So you can't do diffusion without softening our verbal categories enough to be able to notice that you're also relating to them as part of a larger system. Not easily. You can't explain to your clients even why it makes sense to treat your own thoughts with equanimity first. Let's let all of them have a room to play. The negative thoughts, the positive thoughts, maybe they can all be useful. Yeah,
absolutely.
Same thing with emotions. Acceptance won't make sense to you. Could you accept that? I don't want that. What are you going to say? You should want that. What want means is missing. And I get you didn't leap out of the bed this morning saying, hey, I'm missing anxiety. I'm missing sadness. But is anxiety and sadness part of your life journey that could be important to you? Yes. Yeah. So the acceptance piece makes a lot more sense when you think of it as an acting context in this larger way, now linked to pragmatic purposes that you have to state as an a priori. That's the functional contextualism part. That's the addition. That's values. It's stated as our a priori. Why? Because then it becomes, we're back to, this infinite regress, and all symbolic systems have to start from somewhere, and they start by a declaration, so that's a mathematical proven fact, of course. So I can finish it. It'd take too much time, but I can walk through all of the points on the hexagon, all of these 6 psychological flexibility processes, and say they're all empowered by, made sense of, and enriched by understanding the functional contextual assumptions that allow us to look at ourselves and our interaction world in this holistic way that is partitioned for pragmatic purposes, linked to the positive outcomes that we seek as the act in context that we're doing analytically or as a client, and trying to create steps forward that help us achieve those. It's, you could say it this way, ACT is just functional contextualism made real, made alive. It is philosophy in a sense. And when people see that, of course, their lives kind of change. They start living their life as these functional, contextual, pragmatic, values first, all hands on deck, what's helpful to me, what's not, process of living a life worth living.
Many times I say to my clients, do you have a choice? Do you want to live better in this particular context, or do you want to feel better? And sometimes they ask me, but I don't know what my values are. And I don't know how to live by my values. So I'm just wondering, Steve, what is in your experience the best read of someone walking through his values? What's the best read?
Well, values in an ACT approach are not just any goal. They're the outcomes that are intrinsic to the behavior itself, to the ongoing act in context, in the same way that going to the store is intrinsic in the steps you're taking. And what values do, as opposed to goals you can reach and have, you can get to the store. But when you're doing psychotherapy, you want to nest this, and you nest it to the point of, okay, but what are all of these things about? What are the common features that give you a direction, but you can only instantiate but never obtain? So something like being a loving person. Lovingness is inherent in your action.
Yeah.
It's inherent in even the choice that's the value you have. It's immediately present. When you own your values, you're already valuing what? Those. So in the very instant, in the microsecond, in the millisecond, as small as you can get, at the moment that you own a value, you're valuing in that way. There's never a gap. It's never out there in the future, right? But it can be used as a metric because it's in the present, but it has an ongoing, temporally extended present. Love isn't something you have and hold and put in a box. It's something that you instantiate in an ongoing act in context. So you own it, that you're already doing it. And then every step, it's sort of metaphorically, and this is the metaphor we use in ACT, it's like turning and heading in a direction. If I'm headed east, am I headed east? Yes. I'm oriented, I'm headed that way. As I take a step, am I going east? Yes. Am I going east? Yes. If I now go to the north, I say, am I going east? You say, actually, you're going to the north right now.
You will never reach it.
That might be necessary sometimes. Sometimes you have to take detours to get, which means I'm really headed east, but it just looks like I'm headed north because that's how I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
That happens all the time in life.
Yeah.
Where, for example, you do things that don't look loving because it's really loving. You say to your children, no, I will not let you go there. I want to go. What kind of it? It's because I love you and I care about you. And you're not going to be allowed to go to that wild ass party at age 14. Or whatever the thing is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So sometimes you have to get divorced to have relationships that work. Does that look like a journey of love and relationships? It sure doesn't. Yeah, but you can do divorce in an awesome, pro-social, caring, loving way. You can do that. And by doing that, if it needs to be done, get to a place where the next step actually has a chance for a deeper, intimate relationship that reveals what you've learned from the past relationships that you haven't been able to maintain. They're all going to end. You're going to die. It's not a matter of them lasting forever. It's a matter of you learning. Yeah. So, I think the philosophical journey that we're on as a world community is made sense of by digging down to our assumptions, owning them, putting them into our life, and values is a classic example of it. You asked the how. The how? Well, here's the 4 pathways I know to values.
Yeah.
Who are your heroes? What kind of story do you want to write about? If your life was a story, what kind of story are you writing? Where are places where you found connection, vitality, wholeness in your life in any domain? Give me a moment, an actual moment where you felt deeply connected, whole, uplifted, spiritual experiences, profound moments. Or what are the most painful things going on for you right now?
Yeah.
Every one of them will tell you what your values are. Take your pain, flip it over. You'll find that you wanted something, you cared about something that was somehow violated or is interfered with. Take your sweet moments, dig into them, and you're going to find values there. There's something in that moment that rang so true that you remembered it right now. This is of importance. The time my client said to me, thank you so much for helping me. And you were moved to tears because you knew what a hard journey they had been through and how you had been there for them and steps along that way. Unpack that, and you'll find the intrinsic qualities that you want as a therapist. Not just the outcomes. I get that you wanted that outcome. No, what are the qualities that did that? Yeah. write your story. If I ask you right now, it's your free thing to write the next chapter, but you don't get to decide who the characters are. You don't get to decide what the challenges are. What you get to decide is what the storyline is. What is it about? You writing a tragedy? Are you writing a hero's journey? What kind of story are you writing here? Yeah. And you'll find that people will literally kind of mentally put pen to paper to write values-based stories. Or take your heroes. It's one of the easiest and one of those that's most age non-dependent. It's one that you can use even with children. Pick a guide, a hero, somebody who you look up to in your life. And you'll find something there. Can I tell a story about I wrote a blog today about a hero in my life.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so this is a hero story. I wrote a blog today, just put it on Psychology Today. People can find it. Even if they see this later, you can go back and find it. I think the title is something like Thanking a Hero I Never Met. And I tell the story of reading. I'm going to have a hard time telling the story without crying, but I'll try to at least get the words out. It's of reading an obituary of an 87-year-old man who died on 6 days ago.
Wow.
And who was one of the most important persons in my life, and I never met him. I only corresponded with him once, 50 years after the event that I appreciate. And I'll try to keep the story a little short, but I had applied to graduate school and I got rejected everywhere. I was shocked. I wanted to be a doctoral level psychologist. I decided as a high school student I wanted that. I trained for it. I had great grades. I had wonderful test scores. How's it possible? No one even wanted to interview me. It must be a fluke. It's a fluke. So I worked as a carpenter for a slumlord while I got my materials together, and a year later applied again. I got in nowhere, not in a single one. And now I'm really thinking, okay, I'm not going to be a psychologist, and maybe I'll be a carpenter or maybe a politician, because by then I was working full time in an environmental organization as a community organizer. And I said, okay, I'm going to apply one last time. I want to be a psychologist. And my brother had a friend who knew a new faculty member at State University of New York at Stony Brook, where I'd applied twice and been rejected summarily. And not even an interview. And he reached out to this man who went and looked at my file and said, "You have a bad letter." Even named the person. And he said, that person said, "You are a drug addict. You will never get admitted to a doctoral program with that letter."
Wow.
Well, I was a hippie. I had hair down to here. I consumed some drugs like the rest, but I was the first hippie on Loyola Marymount University campus, and they freaked him out. And it freaked out this man who was the chair of the department, a good man, but had escaped actually a communist-dominated country and was terrified by what he saw with young people. He saw it as the rise of something awful. But so when I asked, "Would you write me a letter?" he said, "Oh, yes." And what he meant was, "I am going to keep you out." And he did. Until finally this man told me what was happening. And then, so I applied again. Now without that letter, I got multiple interviews. I went to West Virginia University, had multiple options to select. And my career could start. And for 50 years, I've held in my heart this guy's name, because he did this tiny act of kindness. It probably took him an hour or half an hour. He went to his department. He got in the old files. He pulled out mine. He read it. He found the letter, and he told my brother's friend.
Wow.
His name is Les Femi. He developed a method of mindfulness and attentional training called Open Focus. Very cool. And I've seen his name for 50 years periodically float by. He was head of the Princeton Institute of Biofeedback. And every time it's been 1,000 times in my life, his name, Les Femi, has appeared in my mind, and always with a sense of reverence and appreciation. You know, without that man doing that kind thing for a stranger, I would not be a psychologist. You'd probably be talking to a carpenter, except you wouldn't be talking to me. Yeah. And I wrote him this email a few years ago, and he said, "Oh, well, thank you." It's kind of like, dude, you're singing my praises over a thing that I have no memory of whatsoever. And the blog I wrote, it was like, if somebody dropped something in front of you at the grocery line, and you picked it up and say, here, you dropped this. That might have made an enormous difference in their life. If they had left that on the floor and not found it, everything could have been a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
The butterfly wing effect. Yeah. But that little act of kindness.
Amazing.
So I wrote a thing of appreciation to his wife about how profoundly he had changed his mind. And I tried to find the words, and I wrote, this is going to be hard to even say the sentence. It's a simple sentence. I hope you can understand why this would be so important. The words Les Femi have been hallowed to me. They've been holy to me for 50 years. Put it in a place in my heart where it's like, thank you, thank you, thank you for a tiny, tiny thing. And
Wow.
I said to his wife, I said, I hope it doesn't seem completely goofy, because I know he's done important things, major things, invented things, and I'm sending something that's the equivalent of you gave me my car keys when I dropped them. But that, I said, I have to believe that's the kind of man he was. The tiny little act of kindness mattered to him enough to spend half an hour breaking the rules. You don't tell people what was in they tell you that you can be sued if you do that. And you certainly don't name names.
Yeah.
You don't give the name of the person who wrote the bad letter, but he knew that I was screwed. I had no way forward if he didn't do that. And he took the risk. So my point being here, I don't know, that we leave footprints in the sand by these little values-based actions that we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can we create a world where we can empower people to be more of really who they want to be, and that these small values-based things get manifest in the world? You don't know how the story is going to be written. You don't know how the character is going to show up, but you can know what you intend. And your heroes tell you. So one of the values I have is being kind. And I didn't just learn it from Les Femi, but I learned it from my mother, and I learned it from my father, and I learned it from the people that I love, and I learned it from my heroes. And I look around, and kindness and love and small acts of kindness. So I shouldn't say this out loud. My wife will wince, but I've never not answered an email consciously from somebody who needs something from me. When there's 6-7 million ACT books in print around the world, that is a horrifying thing to say, because it means all around the world, anybody with a problem. But, I figure, even if all I'm saying is go to this website or something, excuse me, this looks like self-praise. I don't want to do that. I'm just saying, your podcast matters. I don't know how many people you have, but I said yes to that because I could see that you cared about something, yeah? And if that means I don't write as many papers or something, then that just means that's what that means. And I'm only here as a psychologist because somebody did the same thing. So you're heroes. That's the fourth one. Long story again. I'm telling nothing but long stories now. But
Delight.
pick your heroes, look at them. You know what your values are. The people you look up to. I guarantee you, you don't look up and say, oh my God, the guy had a new Buick. That never has occurred to you. Oh my God, they have gold-plated doorknobs in their house. It's what they stood for. That means that's what you want to stand for. Otherwise, they wouldn't be your heroes.
Absolutely.
So how do you put that in your life? How do you put your heroes in your life? Well, I'd suggest, think of this moment, think of this day, think of this challenge, moment by moment, as you bend down to give the car keys to the person in front of you in the grocery line. It will make sense of your life. It'll give it an organic feel and emptiness and the challenge we all face of meaninglessness will not hook you in the same way.
Yeah.
Because that car key might mean something to that person. That kindness to me meant something to me. Does it mean something in the grand scheme of things? Dude, I don't know. In the end, it's probably a big ice ball. But meanwhile, I care. Meanwhile, my son, all of my children have come to me asking me that meaningless question, usually with issues of suicidality. Why shouldn't I just kill myself? Which, by the way, everybody asks. 98% of the population admits to suicidal thoughts, and the other 2% are liars. And I gave an answer to my now 32-year-old son when he asked when he was 14. And I said, I don't know. My thoughts are, in the end, it's a big ice ball. Everything passes away. And here's one thing I do want to say. I love you, and I know that you love me. And that matters. He later on told me that he thought it was one of the most important things I ever said to him. I'm not trying to convince him to live. Here's this big thing you can do. Just start with your heart and allow your heart to put energy into your life's moments that your heart yearns for. You've got your values with you. And don't think you're discovering them like something uncovering in a box. No, you're owning them and manifesting them. Never perfectly. Ball through the hoop.
Ball through the hoop, indeed. Stephen, I meant to ask you, thank you very much for sharing this personal story. It really, really means a lot. There's a flow of emotions and thoughts. I meant to ask you one last question. What
Yes.
is it to be a human? But I think you answered it.
I think we are the creatures. We are the one creatures of all God's creatures on this planet that not only is evolving and living and feeling and doing, but has evolved a symbolic system that allows us to reflect back on that, to analyze that, to categorize that, to predict that, to influence that. And that creates a tremendous challenge for us, but also a tremendous opportunity for us.
Absolutely.
Because we can, for the first time, no other living creature can do it quite in the same way, or to the same degree that we can. We can evolve on purpose. And that doesn't mean just individually, as we evolve our lives to head in a values-based direction. It means our small groups as we develop ways to love and cooperate. It means our one world as we step up to a one world ethic of together, no longer the us and them of my tribe and your tribe. We're now all one tribe. And if the pandemic didn't convince you of that, if Canada not having 118-degree heat yesterday for the first time in the history of its country didn't convince you of that, if the TV screen didn't convince you of that, then I don't know what will convince you of it, that the time is now for us to expand our consciousness. These things aren't just giving us a constant diet of horror, judgment, and comparison. That's true, they are.
Yeah.
But they're also giving us the knowledge of what's going on around the world constantly, what's happening to our world that will impact us 100 years from now. They put us in contact with acts of courage and pain through the eyes of others with the magic of cameras and videos in real time. So we're in a position that only monks and highly educated people could be in. Your 8-year-old now knows what time zone it is around the country so that he can talk to people in Australia and Europe at the same time. They know what's happening in the disease rate in Brazil yesterday because of what Bolsonaro is doing. And my wife's Brazilian, and my son knows how many of his family have died of this dread disease because of what's happened in that country. Yesterday, he knows what the infection rate is. He knows what's going on, impacting his friends that he interacts with only in this machine. Yeah, so we are now expanding across time, place, and person, and that is overwhelming. It's almost awful, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Because if we can step into it, if we can find the resources within to step into it, we have the capability of evolving a world that truly is loving and cooperative and that serves humanity and allows us to do with art and literature and science the things that only we know how to do. So time's up, gang. There's a fork in the road here. And psychological flexibility and other science principles can be part of it. The spiritual leaders, the novelists, the people, creators of music and dance, they've known it from the beginning. Our hearts have known it from the beginning. They've given us good guidance, but experimental science can give you that practical guidance of distilling down and saying, for example, with psychological flexibility, learn these 6 skills. Learn them. They'll be useful to you, to the therapist, whatever else you're doing, get those in your clients' heads and hearts and hands, and to the world around you. Let's find a way to scale that.
Yeah.
And to put it also using other things like attachment and compassion and Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles of how we create pro-social groups, and to scale that so that we can create a psychologically flexible and values-based world, not through top-down command and control or bottom-up greed is good nonsense that has poisoned our hearts, destroyed our economic systems, but something that's true to who we are. We're the social primates. That's who we are. That's why we have this ability that you and I have right now. And it's a huge challenge for us, knowing we're going to die, knowing, facing meaningless. It's a huge challenge. But we have the tools in that variability to be whole, spiritual, ethical, competent human beings who care about others and who put that into the world. Time's up.
Stephen, I received wholeheartedly. Your gift today has been a delight to be with you here today. I mean, reading your books, watching your videos, and seeing you here is a big difference. I truly, truly thank you for sharing this and for addressing, why ACT is a philosophical journey. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and thank you for such interesting questions. And I hope my long answers didn't deflect from the importance that I gave to the questions themselves. And so thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Do you have any recent or upcoming courses or books?
I do. And if you go to stephenchayes.com and click on yes, please send it to me. I'll put you on my clinical newsletter. I don't spam people. It's a one-click opt-out. It only comes every month or 6 weeks. And I do have some, if you're a professional and you're interested in the ACT journey, because there's this one old man here about to turn 73. I can't travel around the world and do workshops like I could. Back in the day, I just can't. My body won't tolerate it. I'll do a few. But if you go to Praxis, CET, the word praxis, and then continuing education and training, or just Google my name. You'll see that I have 2 big online courses that I've spent years producing. One called ACT Immersion, one called ACT in Practice. I suggest they be done in that area. And it begins to open up the door from ACT to process-based therapy. And when that hits the ground, when we actually do the process-based therapy work, I have a new book coming out called Learning Process-Based Therapy. We think we've figured out a way, myself and my colleague, Stefan Hoffman, closest friend, used to be an arch enemy of ACT, but now is my best buddy and closest ally, and Joe Sorochi and others involved in PBT. We think that we found a way to scale what's inside this process-based vision to all of applied psychology and clinical psychology in a way that's not grabby, not dominating. It's not like ACT Uber Alles that doesn't make you let go of your heroes or change your language or anything like that.
Yeah,
it will empower your work clinically. So I have a book coming out in November called Learning Process-Based Therapy, and Stefan has a great webinar coming up in 1 month. 6-week webinar on PBT, which I highly recommend. I make nothing from this. I just recommend it.
Lots of interesting things coming up.
Things are unfolding, and hopefully will continue to unfold as the world sees some value in the from core philosophy to processes that change lives vision that's inside CBS.
I truly appreciate your time, Stephen. Best of luck with your amazing work out there, and keep well.
Thank you.
Take
care.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.